That movie is a shit show. What you think you see, what you think you hear, that's what it's about. It's all theater of the mind. No, it's garbage. It's garbage. Mood and atmosphere. Now that I really like. That's what I'm looking for. That's what I want to see. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Dave McRae here. It's Tuesday morning, January the 14th, 2020. You know, we're talking the Sleeping Giants today. Who am I talking about when I say the Sleeping Giants? Well, of course, I'm talking about Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees. We're going to talk a little bit of Michael Myers as well, but in relation to those big sleeping giants, Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger, that's what I'm talking about. I want to thank you for joining me today here on McRae Live, episode number 4. It's hard to believe we're already into our 4th episode, but we're having some fun. We're having some fun here on the show, and we're trucking along as usual. Nice to see everybody in the chat room making their way into the room. 35 people. No doubt that'll go up a little bit as we move on throughout this, roughly. These shows are usually about an hour and a half long or so. So it's great to see everybody in the chat room. Jason Nike is here. Johan Hestbaka. Frank the Tank. Frank Riker is here. Danita Brown is here. Jonathan Nichols, David is here, Jordan Hoddle, am I saying that right? Hoddle, Hodle, I think there'd be 2 D's in that. No, maybe not. Maybe I'm saying it wrong. I could be saying it wrong, you never know. Hey, so what do I mean when I'm talking about the Sleeping Giants? What do I mean in regards to the Sleeping Giants? Well, this is what I mean, folks, okay? This is what I'm talking about. So, we got to go all the way back, and there's going to be a few things that I mention here that you've probably heard me say before, but I got to go back to really set this up because this is really important. And what I mean by the Sleeping Giants, I'm talking about, of course, Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees. When people talk about the world of slasher films, there are what are known as the big 3. And then there's everybody else. And not that, you might even be able to say there's the big 5, right? And the big 5 would probably be Scream, Chucky, Elm Street, Friday, and Halloween. But then you have to think to yourselves, well, that can be very subjective depending on how you look at it, because generally people tend to pick their big 3 or their big 5 depending on which ones they're emotionally attached to, which ones are their favorite. But if we look at sort of the big 3 in terms of, or the big 5, I always look at it from the perspective of how they've embedded themselves into the pop culture consciousness, right? Because I think that is a relatively objective way of looking at it. How these players, these characters have embedded themselves into the pop culture. And there's a variety of different variables then that you can look at to determine that. Excuse me. But when it comes to Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees, they are no doubt 2 gigantic giants. When we talk about the big 3, I mean, you can talk about the big 5, but generally speaking, horror fans refer to the big 3. And those big 3, of course, are Freddy, Jason, and Michael. And over the last 25 years or so, Michael Myers in the world of Halloween has been king. They have run the show, for better or worse, because there's a lot of shit shows in there. They have run the show. And in the social media era that we are in now, and we've been in for the last, primarily I'd say really hot the last 10 years or so. I mean, social media has existed, for the better part of, I would say, the last 15 years or so. I mean, YouTube was, 2004, 5, I think, somewhere in there. I got this channel in 2006. And then, of course, Facebook, it was like 2004 or 5. Twitter, I think, was 2008 or 9 or something like that. But social media as we know it, and it's only going to continue to get better and worse. But social media as we know it has really only been sort of, in full force like it is today, the last 10 years or so. And when you're online, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or YouTube, and you jump online and you look at all sort of out of those big three, who is the most popular? Well, there is no doubt, at least not in my mind, maybe in your mind, but very little doubt in my mind that it is Michael Myers and Halloween. Jason and Freddy, there are Fred heads out there. There are, Jason heads out there. They are out there, but they are largely dormant. They are largely just lying asleep because for the last 25 years or so, there really hasn't been anything to get too excited about in the world of Friday the 13th or A Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, you've heard me say this, and it's true. And I will get to your super chats if they come in, but I'll get to it when I get to the Q&A portion of the show, just to let you guys know, but I do appreciate it. I will go back and make sure that I get them. And there was also a super chat that came in late last night to Two Dudes and Some Bullshit from Todd Fair. Todd, if you're watching, maybe you're watching this after the fact, I did get it, buddy. I appreciate it. I will answer it on a future maybe I'll answer it next week on next week's Two Dudes, but I do appreciate it nonetheless. So when we go back to the 1980s, or let's go back to 1978. Halloween was released in 1978, and then Halloween 2 was 1981. The very first Friday the 13th, was 1980. After Halloween 2's 1981, Michael Myers ceased to exist. He was irrelevant. Nobody gave a fuck about him. That is why if you were a young boy growing up in the 1980s like I was, and you tried to dress as Michael Myers, everybody thought you were Jason. Even after The Return of Michael Myers came out in 1988 and The Revenge of Michael Myers came out in 1989, if you still tried to dress up as Michael Myers and you went trick-or-treating or you're at a Halloween party, if you're old enough to remember, who did they think you were? They thought you were Jason. And that is primarily because Freddy and Jason ruled the 1980s. Between 1981 and 1988, Michael was MIA. He was nowhere to be found. And Freddy and Jason ruled the decade. They did. They were the two most iconic faces in all of horror throughout the 1980s. And then, in the early 1990s, they sort of went away. And then something happened in the mid-1990s that changed the course of horror again and allowed Michael Myers and Halloween to reign supreme. And that was a little movie called Scream in 1996, directed by Wes Craven. Horror, for the most part, slasher horror, from the, I'd say, really late 80s to the early 90s, to like 94, 5, was really, it was over. It was over. The slasher genre, the time for the slasher genre as we knew it had its heyday really in the late 70s, early to mid 80s, probably about from 78, 79, 80 especially, to probably about 87, 86, 87. That was when, you saw the bulk of your low budget B-movie slasher films, Friday and Elm Street included in that. And then by the time Michael made his return, it was kind of like, yeah, been there, done that, it's over, right? Nobody was really caring about it. Nobody was really excited about it. I mean, Halloween fans were, but in terms of embedding itself into the pop culture like Freddy and Jason did, it was kind of too little too late. So people kept thinking you were Jason. They saw a white mask and a jumpsuit kind of thing, and they thought because Jason was so popular, and so was Freddy. But jumping ahead to the mid-90s now, in 1996, Scream sort of opened the door again for a resurgence for the slasher genre because there was a new generation of teenagers that had come along, myself included. And Jamie Lee Curtis had this great idea about doing a 20th year anniversary for Halloween. And and we know how that all got, made. So in 1998, Halloween H2O came out. Freddy and Jason were non-existent. There was no Freddy resurgence film in the late 90s. There was no Friday the 13th resurgence film in the mid to late 90s. Halloween capitalized on an opportunity, whether they realized they were doing it or not. And in a lot of cases, this is, in retrospect, right? I mean, you definitely saw a bit of a trend happening, Scream 2, I Know What You Did Last Summer, I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, Urban Legend. I mean, there was a lot of, of that late 90s horror that was coming out, that was becoming popular. It was like, oh, slashers were cool again. And Halloween capitalized on that. And and Halloween H2O was incredibly successful at the box office, but it also was a connection to the past. A lot of people who watch me, their first introduction into the world of Halloween was actually Halloween H2O. It wasn't the original. It wasn't part 2. It wasn't 3, 4, 5, or even 6. The very first Halloween film I ever saw in the theater was Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers, back in 1995. And my first introduction to Halloween was in the 80s as a young boy. But there are a lot of people that but because Michael Myers was not popular in the 1980s, I don't mean he was not known about, but I mean in comparison to who I refer to as the sleeping giants, the giants Freddy and Jason, in comparison, relative to, nobody gave a fuck about him. So people were being reintroduced to him, and those that had forgotten about him were being reintroduced to him again. And because H2O was a connection to the original first 2 films, pretending that 4, 5, and 6 never happened, it worked as an opportunity and because it was very apparent that that's what they were doing, it also opened the doors for, hey, if you liked this, go back and watch this. So many people who were introduced to the world of Halloween also were going back and watching the originals. Now, New Nightmare came out in 1994, but that was 2 years before Scream. The slasher genre was largely dead. And New Nightmare was basically a meta sort of, very avant-garde take on Elm Street. Lots of people loved it. I like it. Lots of people didn't like it. But that was at a time when that nobody really cared about the slasher genre. Scream in 1996 kicked off, a new wave. But Freddy and Jason didn't capitalize on that new wave. For obvious reasons. There's, a variety of reasons. So then Halloween Resurrection comes out in 2002. Not a very good movie, right? There are fans out there that like it, but not a very good film. And like I said at the beginning of the show, for better or worse, Michael was in the pop culture. Halloween H2O, Halloween Resurrection, Rob Zombie's Part 1, Rob Zombie's Part 2. And Jason, although there was Freddy versus Jason in 2003, again, that's a movie that, again, it's shticky. It's spoofy. It's avant-garde in many cases, right? It's almost like it's almost like it's looking at itself in sort of a humorous way. I'm not saying that, I wasn't a big fan of it, but there are fans out there of that film. But it's an acquired taste. It has a very specific identity and formula. So it's not a film that was going to necessarily reinvent the franchise, because it was like a carnival act, in some ways. Hey, imagine this kind of thing. Michael Myers over the last 25 years, again, for better or worse, has been able to reign supreme because Freddy and Jason have really not got their acts together. And the movies they have released, like Elm Street in 2010 and Friday in 2009, trying to, reintroduce people to the franchise, it just weren't very good movies. That's one thing that H2O had. Now, I'm not a big fan of H2O, but it had a very specific formula, largely because of Scream, that it felt very much a product of its time. So it was exactly what Scream was, but with Halloween. It had the same feel, the same vibe, the same look. Kevin Williamson, I believe, even took a crack at the script, if I'm not mistaken. I think he helped it, if I'm not mistaken on that. There's even a musical cue that appears in Halloween that also appears in Scream, right? There's a lot of there's an identity to Halloween H2O. I always say it looks like Michael Myers walked onto the set of Dawson's Creek. I'm not a big fan of the movie, but I do understand why it's popular. And I do understand why, especially at that time, it did what it needed to do to get Halloween back on track. And it took an opportunity where where Freddy and Jason weren't. I would be very curious to see where Freddy and Jason are today in terms of pop culture and popularity, had they capitalized on that. Had in 1999 there been a Friday the 13th. Had in 1997 there been a Elm Street film. Now, again, there's a variety of reasons why there wasn't. But that seed that was planted with Halloween H2O, reintroducing a new generation to the world of Halloween. Because I hear it. I see it all the time. People reach out to me all the time and say that Halloween H2O was their first Halloween experience. It was their first film they ever saw of Halloween, which made them go back and watch the others. And that connection that movie had to the past was really important. So Freddy and Jason have not been able to capitalize on the social media pop culture that we live in now, whereas Michael has, for better or worse. Right? For better or worse. And now, of course, we have Halloween 2018, the highest grossing slasher film in the history of motion pictures. This coming year, we have Halloween Kills. It's going to do well. Maybe not that well, but it'll do fine. It'll make its budget back. And then next year, of course, we have Halloween Ends. Michael is king right now, and he's been king in the world of pop culture and social media. I mean, look at the amount of Halloween fan films, for better or worse, there are online. Now, I know what you're thinking, but Dave, look at Never Hike Alone. Look at Jason Rising. Look at, yeah, absolutely. And you can thank all those other Friday the 13th fan films, not that there weren't any before Never Hike Alone, but you can certainly thank Vincent DeSante and the crew and the cast of Never Hike Alone for letting those Friday fans see what's possible in the world of Friday the 13th fan films. But there's still far more Halloween fan films. And Halloween fan films have been around for the last 10 years. And for better or worse, I'm not talking about the quality. I'm talking about how these guys have embedded themselves into the pop culture consciousness. And how relevant they are, how excited fans get about them. And Michael Myers has just reigned supreme. You know, you look at the Facebook groups, you look at the horror groups. You mentioned Freddy, you get some people. You mentioned Michael Halloween. Oh my God, everybody's wah! You know, and it's just it's been like that for. And again, that's largely because Freddy and Jason have been non-existent in a real positive way when it really mattered, right? I mean, I know there are a lot of people that liked the 2009 Friday film. I understand that, but Jason and Freddy haven't been relevant in a really long time. Really relevant in pop culture in a really long time. And, you know, it has me very curious that when Victor Miller and Sean Cunningham can get their acts together and sort this out. And by the way, you know, I've read up on it and I see both sides of the argument. I do. Now, what eventually has to happen, whether you side with Cunningham or Miller, and I get a sense that the vast majority of people side with Miller, but nonetheless, the law is the law, and whatever is, now that doesn't mean there aren't loopholes, but whatever is legally, you know, whatever is legal, whatever is the law, then that must be what it is. But I can certainly see both sides of the argument. Now, this is supposed to be coming to an end later this year, and hopefully it will. But if we can get that sorted out, and of course the rights to the Elm Street franchise have gone back to the Craven estate, and obviously I'm attached to a high production fan film called Dylan's New Nightmare, starring Miko Hughes, reprising his role from New Nightmare, and I'll be playing Freddy, and we're supposed to be shooting that in the coming months down in Phoenix. And so that's exciting. But if Freddy and Jason can get their acts together, I am curious if they will have the same pop culture impact that Michael Myers has had, because I get a sense that they are sleeping giants. And when I say sleeping giants, I don't just mean Freddy and Jason. I mean the Fred heads and the fans, the Freddy fans and the Jason fans who are just waiting for something exciting to happen. I'm curious to see if Freddy and Jason, because they have an uphill battle, if Freddy and Jason will be able to make a resurgence and a return to the pop culture like they did in the 1980s. You know, because Freddy and Jason haven't really, I mean, they're out there. There are Facebook groups dedicated to Friday the 13th and Elm Street. But when you compare it to the impact that Halloween and Michael Myers has had, it's largely not even comparable. It's just the obsession that Halloween fans and horror fans have with Michael Myers is unbelievable. And again, it's largely because there has been no competition. You know, there hasn't been a lot that Freddy fans and Jason fans can get excited about over the last 20 years, you know, or 25 years. I mean, there's been, you know, things that pop up, but then they're not very good, or they don't make another one, or they don't follow up, or it's a fucking shit show, or, you know, and Freddy and Jason just haven't really been able to grab, you know, the bull by the horns, as the saying goes, and really take off. And Michael Myers has had really just an open road over the last 25 years or so, for better or worse. And especially where it mattered and counted, which was in the world of pop culture, in the world of social media, and being able to really sort of grab on to fans and reintroduce them to a new generation of fans. And so, you know, because, I mean, I remember how popular Freddy and Jason were. Oh my God. I mean, you could walk into a store, and again, there's reasons for this, some of them legal as well, but you could walk into a store in the 1980s at Halloween time and buy a Freddy Krueger mask later, not right away, but say like 86 and on. You could buy a Freddy Krueger glove and mask, that you know, the mask and, you know, the plastic knife, you could buy that like that. No problem. You could buy hundreds of them all over the place. No problem. Jason masks, no problem. Now, did it look like the Jason mask from the movie? Well, no, but it was a hockey mask. It was a goalie mask. Some of them glowed in the dark, I think. There was some, like, you know what I'm talking about, right? I think you know the ones I'm talking about. You could find them like that. No problem. Michael Myers? No. Some people had masks. Actually, do I have the... I don't think they're there. I think I put them away. You could find a mask that you knew was supposed to be Michael Myers. It was a white mask with brown hair and brown eyebrows. And for those of you that are old enough to remember, there's no doubt that you remember that. But nobody would know that you were Michael Myers. It didn't look like, we thought it looked like Michael Myers. I remember buying one and I was like, holy shit, because it was the only thing that we had. It was the only thing we had. I mean, you look at the Michael Myers masks that are available today by the independent guys and even Trick or Treat Studios. You know, I'm not a big fan of their work, but if I was able to get their H1 mask 30 years ago, oh my God, I'd be the envy of every fucking kid in the neighborhood. They'd be like, holy shit! You know what I'm saying? But back then, buying that kind of mask, you know, it was just a white face, and you knew who it was supposed to be, but it wasn't even called Michael Myers. It was because they weren't allowed to do that. It wasn't even called a Halloween mask. It was called something like the White Mask or the Ghostly Man Mask or something like that. But you knew who it was supposed to be. And, you know, nobody knew who the hell you were. They just assumed you were Jason because Jason had a white mask. It was a hockey mask, and you know what I mean? So it's a fascinating area of discussion because, you know, if they can get their acts together and Jason and Freddy can make a return, I'm very curious to see whether the sleeping giants, Freddy and Jason and all their fans, are ready. Because believe it or not, folks, as crazy as this might seem to big Halloween fans, and I'm primarily a Halloween channel, so there are people that are Halloween obsessed here watching me. There are a lot of people out there that love Freddy and Jason far more than they love Michael. I know, crazy, right? What? That's not possible. Yeah, because of how crazy Michael has been. He said an open road. But there are many fans out there that prefer Freddy. There are many fans out there that prefer Jason. And I just cannot help but have this feeling that if they can get their acts together and create a solid film, a film that the fans can be proud of, that there's going to be an explosion of Freddy and Jason coming back. Now, maybe I'm wrong. I mean, maybe it's too past its expiry date. Maybe Freddy and Jason, if they were to make a comeback, you would see a little bit of a resurgence in terms of popularity and pop culture and things like that. And, Facebook groups and social media and stuff, but nothing in comparison to what Michael Myers is. That's entirely possible. But I am really curious to see what's going to happen, because I'm just waiting. I'm waiting for this moment, because there's a lot out there in terms of Freddy and Jason that can be done. But I do think, I was talking about this last night on Two Dudes and Some Bullshit. I do think that the Freddy and Elms, and I thought this with Halloween, and it largely is to a point, but Freddy and Jason they are at the heart of an Elm Street film, at the heart of a Friday film. They are B movies, is what they are. Now, when I say B movies, I don't mean bad movies. B doesn't mean bad. Okay, I'm not saying they're bad movies. I'm just saying that they are the slasher the slasher subgenre of horror is largely a B movie. It started in sort of an exploitative kind of genre, and then it matured a little bit, but it's a B movie at its heart. And I think that Friday and Elm Street and Halloween too, Halloween as well, I mean, are largely B movies. And when I say that, I would love to see Friday and Elm Street come back, but in that flavor. And what I mean by that is, giving it that independent sort of vibe, that nuance that doesn't feel high budget, doesn't feel pristine. It doesn't have that glitz and that sheen over it that you see a lot of modern day horror films have. Like, I would love to see a production company like A24 take a crack at Elm Street. Something like that, where it's a very dark, scary, very scary, very intense film, but it's got that visual aesthetic and that feeling and that vibe that you get when you watch like a Hereditary, or you get when you watch things that just that real creepy, independent kind of vibe, because I think that would actually do the genre justice, rather than creating an Elm Street or Friday film that's bigger than what it really is, because it's not. And once you start playing in a larger sandbox and you add the Hollywood shine to it and the Hollywood glitz to it, and, the color grade is all, that aqua orangey kind of color, and, it just, and everything feels bigger, and it's just not, I just don't think these films live there. You can look at Halloween 2018, and it does have a certain vibe to it that feels smaller, but that's also because the Halloween story is smaller as well. I mean, that's something you have to keep in mind too, is that when your stories are smaller, they should feel small, and I think the idea of having a Friday the 13th film taking place at a camp, like, that's one of the things I love about the original 1980 film. You've heard me say it 1,000 times. It's low budget, so a lot of the feel and look is they had no choice. But I love how dark it is, and I love the claustrophobic nature of the original film, and how it just feels so real. Like, these people are really out there in the middle of nowhere, and everything's nuanced and it's not rushed, and there isn't these wildly sexy stars that are in it, and it doesn't feel like it feels legit, and of course, they went away from that as the films went on. But anyway, I'm rambling here. The point of the topic of this show, again, was just to kind of throw it out to you guys and to see what you guys think in terms of these sleeping giants. Are you yourself a sleeping giant? Have you just been waiting for your moment in the sun? Have you like Michael, sure, yeah, he's cool, but you're a Fredhead. And you're just like, fuck, come on, man, come on. I want to fucking start a Facebook group, and I tried to, but I don't have anybody in there. Or I get a few people in there, but there's not anybody, I don't get that many people. I want to do this. Or are you a Friday fan? Are you a Friday head? And you're just like, come on, man, let's go. These fan films are great. It's awesome shit, man. But come on, like, are they ever going to get this solved? And you're just waiting for your time to shine. And do you think that if Freddy and Jason have their time to shine, that they will then, because they are the undisputed champions? You see, we forget that in the 1980s they were the undisputed champions, and they may want to reign supreme. They may want to reign supreme again, and then you have to look at who would win overall in a head-to-head battle. Think of that. Who's going to go, let's say Michael, because we've never actually had a moment. Think about this. We've never actually had a moment where Jason, Freddy, and Michael have been all popular at the exact same time. At the exact same time. We really haven't had that. Because again, now Friday the 13th did come out in 1980, Halloween 2, 1981, okay? But beyond that, that was it. Michael was done, and then you had Friday movie after Friday movie after Friday movie after Friday movie. Elm Street hit in 84, Elm Street in 84, Elm Street in 85, Elm Street in 87, Elm Street in 88, Elm Street in 89. I mean, by the end of the decade of the 1980s, although they were going head to head, the slasher genre at large was taking a dip. So there was no real head to head in that regard. Because some people will say, well, they went head to head in the late 1980s. Well, they did, but we have to remember the popularity of the slasher genre was waning. It just wasn't what it was, right? So it almost is like, yeah, you had, you did have a Halloween film in 88, and you had a Friday film in it, but it was largely over at that point. I would love to know what the landscape would be. Not just box office. I'm talking about the fans. Because, listen, Halloween is hot right now, and it's been hot for a number of years. But Friday fans and Jason fans, I don't know where they are. I mean, they're out there, of course. I mean, even Cecil, right? Cecil Laird, who's the writer and director of Dylan's new Nightmare. Freddy is his boy. Freddy's his boy, right? Freddy is, and that's why he's doing this thing. He's all about Freddy. So he's one of those guys. Not that he doesn't like Michael or not that he doesn't like Jason, but everybody has their go-to, right? It's like me. I'm a Michael guy, but I love Freddy. Who the fuck doesn't love Freddy? But are there an army of Cecils out there just waiting? You know what I'm saying? Are there an army of Vincent DeSantis out there just waiting in terms of Jason, right? And we're seeing it. I mean, that's the thing. You look what Vince did with Never Hike Alone. Now he's in production, or at least pre-production, I believe. I don't want to overspeak it, Vince, if you're watching. I know he's going to be shooting Never Hike in the Snow very soon. And you look at what that movie did for the fan films, that movie. That's what I mean, folks. Think about that. Like, before Never Hike Alone, there were Jason Friday fan films, sure. But when Never Hike Alone came out in 2017, I believe, now we're seeing more and more higher production. I still think Never Hike Alone is the benchmark. That is the benchmark in terms of high production quality fan film. And that is the benchmark that, of course, Cecil and crew and me and are going to are trying to reach with Dylan's new Nightmare, and we've set everything in place to make that a reality. And that's the same benchmark that, of course, I'm trying to reach with It's Me, Billy, the Black Christmas fan film that I'm in development on. But after that movie, you saw more and more Jason heads coming out of the woodwork and creating higher production value Jason fan films. They started to come out of nowhere. These fans are sleeping giants themselves. And it just makes me wonder, wow, if this can happen from a fan film called Never Hike Alone, what the hell is going to happen when Paramount or New Line, whoever has the rights now, who has the rights now? Well, I guess they're in that, anyway, when they can get their fucking act together and start releasing, what would be considered official Friday the 13th fan films, it makes me wonder, damn, like, does Michael and Halloween really know what they're in for? Because you have all those fans. You see, there are a lot of the Halloween Michael Myers fans. Not everybody, okay? Because I'm not one of them. But a lot of the Michael Myers fans, and I'm not taking anything away from you, but a lot of the Halloween fans that you see, again, their introduction to Halloween was H2O. So they came into the party late. But there are Friday fans and Elm Street fans that grew up with them in the 80s that have had nothing to get excited about over the last 20-something years and are just waiting for that moment. And it's scary. It's like you can hear them. You hear the crowd. It's like, what the fuck? They're just waiting. And it's a fascinating topic. I was talking about this the other day with a buddy of mine because he's a huge Fred head. And he's like, dude, I've been fucking waiting. He said this to me. He said, I like Michael. He said, don't get me wrong. He said, but I'm a Fred head. And he said, I am just waiting, for them to get their act together to make an Elm Street film that is good, that can start maybe a new series, whatever. He's somebody, by the way, that doesn't think Robert should come back. He thinks they should move on. But he's a Fred head, and he's like, I'm telling you, like, I'm waiting. It's interesting. It's one of those topics that you can talk about so much because there's so many layers to it, and but if Never Hike Alone, which is a fan film, it's a high-end, high-production value fan film, one of the most popular online, certainly probably arguably the most popular Friday the 13th fan film ever made. But you look at what that did for just the Friday fan film world. Damn, man. And it's like, what is, if Dylan's New Nightmare ends up being, and I have no evidence that it is going to be, we don't know. That's, we do the best we can, obviously, right? And we put our heart and soul into it and we let the chips fall where they may. But if Dylan's New Nightmare is a success, what might that do for Friday or for Elm Street fan films? Because what these fan films do in large part is when there are no official films from the studios, these fan films keep these sleeping giants relevant and they keep them in the pop culture. They keep them, they keep the fans excited. And if these little and I say little not in a condescending way or in a to bring it down. I just mean in terms of if these little fan films, right, which are not made for millions and millions and millions of dollars, if these fan films can do all of this, what the hell is a really good, awesome, legit studio? What is that gonna do? It's crazy, and a lot of these fans, I mean, they know the properties. They know what fans want, right? They know, I mean, Vince has nailed it. I think it'd be great if he had the opportunity to crack at a real, when I say, real Friday film, right? You know what I mean? And everything that I'm seeing, from Cecil and Freddy, I'm just like, yeah, man, let's do it. Maybe hey, if they want me to, yeah, let's do, it's a lot of the times the fans know those because they're not studio executives, because it's not just about the bottom dollar or about the dollar at all, especially with fan films. The entire creative process and the entire passion is all about delivering the best product. And so that's why you will often see fan films that are like, damn, yes, exactly, because they don't have the shareholders and the studio executives breathing down their necks going, hang on, can you get that person in there because they're sexy and that might put butts in the seats? It's like, I don't care if they're fucking sexy. This is the way it should be because that person, you know what I'm saying, right? That's a really layman's surface level example of a studio executive. But anyway, so it's just an interesting topic because, I'm a part of a few Facebook groups, part of a few horror groups, and you you see it. You talk about Freddy, yeah. You talk about Jason, sure. You talk about Chucky, all right. You talk about Halloween, Michael, rah, the fucking thing just explodes. And again, that's primarily because Michael's relevant. And Michael's had all this time to embed itself into pop culture, embed itself into your love, for horror and things like that. And he's a cool character. I mean, he is. And I've said this before, one of the reasons why Michael is so popular and would remain extremely popular even if Freddy and Jason made a comeback is because of the anonymity, the enigma, and the mystique around his character. We know Freddy's backstory. He's a character that speaks. We know his backstory. There isn't a lot of verbal clutter when it comes to talking about Freddy and knowing, who he is, what he's doing, what his motives are and all that kind of stuff, right? So there isn't a lot of mystique and mystery surrounding Fred Krueger. The same with Jason Voorhees. We know his backstory. We know he was a child that drowned in the lake because he wasn't a very good swimmer. As Mrs. Pamela Voorhees would say, he wasn't a very good swimmer. That's how she says it in the movie. It's awesome. And of course, he died, and he apparently, legend has it that he saw his mother's head off, and he comes back of revenge and blah, blah, blah. So there isn't a lot of mystery surrounding the backstory of Jason. Whenever you can have a character that is shrouded in mystery, why, who is he? I mean, that's one of the reasons why people love Billy from Black Christmas so much. And Black Christmas is an acquired taste, right? I mean, it's an older film. It's a slow burn, but certainly there's a lot of, it's my second favorite horror film of all time behind Halloween. And, but the character of Billy is just awesome because you don't know what he's doing. You don't know who he is, what he's doing, what's his motive, all that kind of jazz. And that's, and that's one of the reasons why people love Michael Myers so much. So Michael will always be popular. It's not like when Freddy and Jason, return, that Michael's suddenly going to fall by the wayside. I don't think that's going to happen because I think he's had too much time to embed himself into pop culture and into people's hearts and minds and fans and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think if Freddy and Jason were to return that Michael would have the free reign that he does. I think if the movies can be done right, because you see, and that's the trick there too. And I mentioned this earlier in the stream, but that really is the crux of it. What H2O did was not only, it's the perfect storm, right? The slasher genre is returning. It's making a bit of a comeback, a bit of a late sort of last surge in the late 90s, because other than the late 90s, that was really the last time the slasher subgenre has any sort of real surge. That was really it. Now we've had slasher movies since then. We've had them every year. There's always been some slasher movie, but they've really sort of now become a B-movie acquired niche area. Whereas in a lot of cases, horror movies, that was a horror movie. A horror movie was a slasher movie in a lot of cases, way back then. Now, of course, they're very a niche area. So, but it was the perfect storm, and Halloween, and it was the perfect type of Halloween movie. It wasn't a sequel to Halloween 6, right? It wasn't like they were doing, and they were going to, I believe the idea was they were going to do a straight to video sequel to Halloween 6. I think that was, or either that or H2O was going to be a straight to video. I can't remember which, but it was definitely going to be straight to video. And of course, they didn't do that. Had Halloween H2O been actually a sequel to 6, it might be a different story. It might be a different story, but because it's that connection to the past, Halloween H2O prompted fans to go and watch the originals to see how we got to this point in the story. And a lot of people did that. Had there been a remake of an Elm Street maybe, or maybe a direct sequel to part 1 in 1997 or something, maybe it would have prompted people to go, because there just were no Friday or Elm Street films. There was a Friday film in 2001, which was Jason X, but again, that was a sequel in space. It was too strange and weird, and by that time, the late 90s horror slasher surge was dying again. Slasher surges are not long. The two surges that we've seen, like the real surges, have not been long. Halloween came out in 78, but that wasn't, you could say it kicked off the slasher surge, but I argue that and say that I think Friday the 13th really kicked off the slasher surge, really. So you have like that, Halloween let Friday knew what was possible, but then Friday kicked off this low budget, early to mid 80s, kind of thing. So yeah, like I would say from 80 to 85 or 6 is really sort of a slasher surge there. And then the late 80s films, like you're really going down, right? And you can totally see it. Popularity, pop culture, box office, you're kind of going down. Mid 90s, of course, Scream 96, 97, 98, and 99. By the time you hit 2000 and 2001, you're starting to dip again. And that's when Jason X came out. If Jason X come out in 1996, 97, might be different. Although again, it's the 10th movie in a long line of sequels that it didn't necessarily tell people to go back and revisit the original, or revisit where this all began per se. So it was again, it's all timing. Like the point I'm talking about here is that it's all timing. And I think that Michael, like for better or worse, Rob Zombie or not, resurrection or not, his timing was always, the timing for Michael Myers was always decent. It was always on point. And whereas Freddy and Jason just haven't had that opportunity. And then of course you combine that with movies that are not very good and cannot embed itself, there's not much we can do. Freddy and Jason need that. They need a movie that is going to, one movie, just begin with one, that is going to honor what's come before, embrace what's about to come in the future. And tell the fans that this is the Freddy and Jason you've been waiting for. And that to me is going back and going small, because I think there's a lot of fans out there that are just waiting for their time and their opportunity to have their day in the sun. Because Michael's just had it too easy. I think he's had it too easy. There largely hasn't been competition in the world of slasher films being released when it comes to Michael Myers. And horror has changed as well, right? Like I said, the slasher subgenre is really a niche area now, and the horror genre has changed. I mean, we're not into slashers. We're into sort of, and have been for a number of years now, the paranormal, ghost, supernatural, the paranormal, ghost, supernatural subgenre of horror is what the slasher genre was in the early 80s and in the mid to late 90s. Like that, like when you watch a horror movie today, 9 times, like a bona fide horror film, 9 times out of 10, it's a supernatural, some sort of supernatural ghost, spiritual type movie, right? I mean, that really is almost what horror is today, right? Well, that's what horror was in the 80s and in the mid 90s. It was just slasher films. It doesn't mean there wasn't a ghost movie, or I'm talking about, largely, generally, 9 times out of 10, it was a slasher film. So, that's something to think about as well. Is that if Freddy and Jason, is it just too late? Is it just too late? Unless maybe the only way you can regain its popularity is if you were to go back and utilize, and this sounds like a cheap trick, it really does, but I get it from a business perspective, and I understand it even from a creative perspective. I do understand it, but it does seem a little cheap and a little kind of like it's cheating a bit. I think you guys know what I'm going to say. Capitalizing on the nostalgia. You go back and you do a direct sequel to Elm Street 3 or Elm Street, 2 or 1, or, the more, the earlier films. Or like what Cecil's doing over at the horror show, you do a direct sequel to New Nightmare, right? Or, with Friday, you go back and you do a direct sequel to part 4. You pretend that 5 and 6, and I know everybody loves 6. I'm just saying, maybe you do a direct sequel to part 4 and you bring back Corey Feldman as Tommy Jarvis, right? Or maybe you don't. Maybe you do a direct sequel to 6, right? And you bring back Tom Matthews, like what Vince has done with, the Never Hike the Never Hike Alone franchise, which is, it's essentially becoming now. So there's an emotional nostalgic connection to the films that have come before, because it might be almost too, like, unless the movie is off the wall incredible, I mean off the wall outstanding, what is going to happen with Freddy and like, you can't make another mediocre Elm Street film and expect it to do anything. You can't expect to make another mediocre Friday the 13th film and expect it to do anything. It's just going to be another Friday film that might do, do well, do fine, but unless it's really good, which we've seen no evidence that, that they're going to do that. Maybe the real answer is to go back and connect it to what's come before, because that is one thing. The two times that the Halloween franchise has started again, per se, in the world of what people really like, it's actually begun again 3 times. Well, you could say 4 times if you include part 4 after Season of the Witch. But really, it began again in 1998 with Halloween H2O. Okay. And then it began again in 2007 with Rob Zombie's Halloween. Okay. And then it began again in 2018 with Halloween 2018. But the two real popular ones there are Halloween 2018 and Halloween H2O. And that's largely because it's connected to what we know. It's connected to the OG. It's connected to the past. And that's largely why, look, there are no doubt that Halloween 2018 was a new generation's first introduction into the world of Halloween and Michael Myers. For better or worse, it's like they've done this twice now. So, it's just one of those things where making a sequel that's connected to the past to bring people in and allow them to watch this new generation of Friday and Elm Street fans to watch this and go, wow, that's cool. I want to see how they got here. So then maybe if they're with their dad or their mom or their friends, wow, this is so cool. Let's go back and watch the originals, or let's go back and watch the first one and see how they got here. Maybe that's the way to go. Now, in terms of longevity, I don't know how you would do that. Unless you turn it into what they're doing with Halloween. You let's take Elm Street, and let's hypothetically say they do a sequel to part 1 only. They pretend that 2, and that, hey, it's going to piss a lot of people off, but they did it with Halloween. And I know you're saying, well, why don't you do a sequel to part 3? Well, because Nancy's dead. If you want to bring back Heather Langenkamp, you either have to create something that seems organic and legit and justifies why she's still alive. And I'm not saying you can't do that. I'm just saying that is a writing obstacle that you have to face. Or you make a direct sequel to part 1, or even part 2. You can make a direct sequel to part 2. I don't mean it has anything to do with part 2. I'm just saying that part 2 is still canon. But you do a sequel and you bring back Heather, and I know people bring back Robert. He's the only one that can play. We can have that argument till it's blue in the face. I don't believe that Robert is the only one that can play Freddy. And if you do bring back Robert, well, what's the game plan, right? You bring him back, but is it just for one movie? Because that's going to piss a lot of people off if he's back for one movie, but then they have to recast for the sequel. So if you planning on turning this into a franchise and Robert only wants to do one, well, I just think you just recast. You know what I mean? Because then you just avoid all that backlash that you're going to get when you find out that Robert doesn't want to do the sequel. But anyway, I'm going off on a tangent as I normally do here on my channel. But yeah, so it's a fascinating sort of discussion. And we're going to jump to the chat room here in a second. You guys can toss out the super chats and the questions now. But it's one of those things where I want to know what you guys think. Are you a Fred head? Are you a Jason head? Are you just waiting for your time for them to get it right? Do you think that Jason and Freddy have a chance in today's climate, in today's social media climate, in terms of embedding itself into the pop culture like it did 30 years ago? Do you think that Michael, that the popularity and the strength and the fandom for Halloween and Michael maybe is just too strong? Or maybe yourself, maybe you're like, no, dude, like, let's do this. Let's fucking get these, a rising tide raises all ships, right? I mean, that's how I tend to think sometimes when it comes to these types of things. I would really like to know. But yeah, there are specific reasons why Michael has had his free reign, and that's largely because Freddy and Jason really, at the end of the day, just haven't, their timing has been off. It's like a pitcher on the mound. His timing's just not there. Every time he throws it, he's throwing it, but every time he throws it, it's a ball, or it's a foul ball, but he's not throwing those strikes. And for whatever reason, when Michael gets up to the mound, he's just throwing strikes. Maybe they're barely strikes, or maybe he's throwing balls, which he does on occasion, but he's throwing more strikes than balls. It sounded kind of weird, but I think you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, let's move over to the chat room and see what you guys are saying. The sleeping giants, are you a sleeping giant? Comment below and let me know if you're watching after the fact. And let's get you guys in the chat room now. Let's see. Super chat. JJ Super Chat says Sinister Six, Michael, Jason, Freddy, Leatherface, and Ghostface. I think they all phase in and out of popularity, but Michael is the king. Well, he's the king right now, but he wasn't the king throughout the 1980s. So Michael, I mean, is it a matter that Jason and Freddy are more popular than Michael and can be more popular than Michael if they all have an even playing field? See, that's the thing. We don't even really know yet, because when Freddy and Jason were running supreme in the 1980s, I'm not going to say it's primarily because we don't know, but one of the factors could be that because Michael was MIA. So had Michael been, making movies in 1982 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 alongside Freddy and Jason, would Michael have been just as iconic, just as popular as Freddy and Jason? Would they have been seriously talking about a Freddy versus Michael or a Jason versus Michael? I know that's been tossed around casually, but it was never a real hardcore serious thing like it was with Freddy and Jason. That was that was your Godzilla and King Kong. But Michael was not existent. Well, now you have Michael reigning supreme, but Freddy and Jason are largely non-existent. So there really hasn't been that true opportunity to see if they can all go head to head and see who is the true king. Do you know what I'm saying? Like that, it's such a fascinating thing, right? Really fascinating. And maybe there'll be like a dark horse that slides in there, like Leatherface all of a sudden starts getting it right, and people are just they're just Leatherface crazy. They're Leatherface crazy. Maybe that's what it is. Or maybe, like you said, Sinister, just got Michael, what the hell's going on? This is dark race. And we got Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees. They're running up the line. Here comes Freddy. Freddy is oh my God, here comes Chucky. He's coming out of nowhere. Chucky's a bat. I mean, maybe that's what it's going to be. I have no idea, but fascinating stuff to say the least, folks. Really interesting stuff. Let's see here. Super chat comes in from Frank Riker. Dave, in your best old man voice, can you say, I remember when Nightmare on Elm Street, fill in the blank. I remember when Nightmare on Elm Street. I remember when I used to watch it in the tub, clipping my toenails. There you go. He used to watch it in the tub, clipping his toenail. What the hell's going on there? Justin Valdera says, Dave, could the reason that Freddy and Jason are not popular right now is because of the people involved with these franchises, the producers and creators holding them down like a dead duck? Well, I mean, yes, but I mean, that would go yes and no. I mean, those are the reasons why. There are reasons why we can point to, objective reasons we can point to that are the reasons why we don't have a Freddy and Jason movies per se. But even if there wasn't the legal shit show involved with Friday the 13th, and even if, that didn't exist, or it just comes down to that just nobody's making movies, so regardless of the reason why they're not making movies, I mean, maybe there could be nothing wrong. Maybe the, legal thing didn't exist and everybody's happy and everybody's great. They're just not making movies, so really it comes down to the fact that they're just not making movies. And that's why they're not there. They're not in the pop culture. Now, I mean, they're always in the pop culture. I'm not saying that they're completely gone. You go to horror cons, you go to horror shows, they're everywhere. Freddy, Jason, they've made their impact. They've made their long-lasting stamp on horror pop culture. But I'm talking about the relevance of social media and the excitement that surrounds them in relation to Michael Myers and Halloween. That's essentially what I'm talking about. So hopefully people understand. I'm not saying that that Freddy and Jason, you go to a horror con or you can't find a t-shirt or you can't find a glove or you can't find, no, I'm not saying that. They will always be hugely popular. But in terms of the social aspect of it, and the world and the climate we live in now, it's Michael, and it's really interesting. Pride Sayan says Leatherface is coming back, and that's awesome. For me, he is Michael's little brother, even if his movie was released earlier. But for me, they look like they related to each other. Uncle Maggie. Yeah, well, I mean, listen, Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw has attempted to reboot itself a few times over the last number of years. I quite enjoyed the 2003 Platinum Dunes remake. I thought that actually was, as far as remakes go, that was fantastic. And then, of course, they followed that up with Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Beginning, which I thought, personally, I thought was dog shit. I don't understand the obsession with these franchises and films making something and then going back to the beginning. Here's a novelty. Here's a novel thought. Why don't you start at the beginning? No, obviously there are reasons why they don't do that. Very specific brand identity reasons why they don't, amongst a number of others. But I've never been a big fan of that. I've never been a big fan of going backwards. So anyways, that movie didn't do very, and then of course you had the remake, in 12 or 13 or something to that degree, which I watched, and I really enjoyed the opening of that movie and how it picked up where the original left off. I thought that was really interesting and really fascinating. But I did not like how they essentially made Leatherface into the anti-hero. And you actually felt empathy for him. And you felt almost sorry for him. I didn't like that because he is a murderer. Yes, he might be a little mentally not there, and there might be some, he's a few bricks shy low, to say it, But at the end of the day, he's still a murderer. And I didn't like the fact that the filmmakers were almost making us feel something for him, sorry for him. And it's like, yeah, it does suck that he grew up in a hick fucking bullshit IQ of a water bottle family, but I mean, he still has to pay for his sins. I mean, he still has to, he still has to pay for what he did. And then, of course, the one that came after that I didn't see. And now, of course, they're rebooting it again, having it a direct sequel to the original or something. So Leatherface has attempted, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre series is a very strange series. I mean, even the direct sequel to the original was comedic and strange with Dennis Hopper. And it's a very strange series in and of itself. So, we'll see what happens, but I don't think there are as many Leatherheads out there as there are Fred and Jason heads, but they certainly are out there. Super chat comes in from Chris Baber. Thank you, buddy. Very accurate on your point on buying Myers masks in the 80s. My first one in 1986 was simply called The Mask. There you go. You see, Chris Baber knows exactly what I'm talking about. It was very difficult to find a Michael Myers mask in the 1980s. You knew what it was supposed to be, but it wasn't called that. They couldn't call it that for legal reasons, and it didn't look anything. We thought it looked like Michael because we didn't have anything to compare it to. We're like, oh, this fucking is great, And of course, you look at photos of it now, and you're like, it doesn't look anything like Michael Myers. Like, it looks literally nothing like Michael Myers. So, especially in comparison to what they're dishing out now. Like, you youngins youngins that are coming up now that all you've ever known is the Michael Myers masks from Trick or Treat, or, you know, the independent guys that make them. You don't know how lucky you are. You have no, I mean, maybe you can't afford one because maybe it's a little too much for you at this, you know, although the Trick or Treat Studios masks, I think, are pretty reasonable. But you know, the independent guys, right? But I'm telling you, man, you don't know how lucky. I would have given anything to have a Trick or Treat Studios Halloween 1 mask. Like I still think the independent guys do it better because they're not mass produced, so they can focus on the nuances and the details, you know, the subtleties of their masks because it's sort of made to order, right? First come, first serve kind of thing. So they really pay attention to the details. Whereas the Trick or Treat Studios H1 mask looks pretty good. Like it does. Like it does. 100%. For a mass-produced mask, looks pretty good. I would have given anything to have at least that. Like, that would have been amazing. So, yeah, Chris is bang on there. Yeah. Michael was just not... Freddy and Jason were the kings of the 80s, and there's reasons for it. But they've been sleeping giants for a number of years now, and there's reasons for it, which has opened the door for Michael's reign. But is Michael's reign coming to an end? Is it coming to an end with Kills? I mean, what if Kills is not very good? What if Kills is dog shit? Uh-oh. And then you got Ends. Is Ends going to be dog shit, or is Ends going to... I have a feeling Kills actually is going to... I just have this feeling that Kills is... I have a feeling it's actually going to be better than H18. But we don't know. We don't know, right? You know? Where does Freddy and Jason fit into this? You know, I tell you, man, they're sleeping... They could be sleeping giants, right? Well, they are sleeping giants, but whether they still have the to make a comeback is still yet to be seen. Let's see here. Halen Cox says, thank you for the super chat, buddy. He says, slasher genre universe, the main 3 crossover. I don't want to see that personally. I'm not a big fan of versus films. It just feels cheesy to me. It feels a little chintzy. I understand it from a fan perspective, like a fan film, or I don't know. I like to take these things seriously, and I like when they exist in their own universes and the idea of, I mean, listen. Oh, are we back? I think we're back. We should be back. We are back. Sorry about that, folks. Not sure what happened there. We are back. A little bit of a hiccup there. But we're back, which is the important thing. I think I might have actually accidentally hit the stop button on the stream. Sorry about that. I accidentally hit the stop button on the stream. Hey, it happens. Last thing I was saying, I was talking about, I don't know where I was. The last thing I said, I was reading a super chat from Halen Cox, who said, slasher genre universe, the main 3 crossover. So let me just pick up there. I'm not a big fan of crossovers. So I think for me, at the end of the day, I think it just feels a little cheesy, a little chintzy for me. I'm spitting here. I got to get the water. A little cheesy, a little chintzy for me it's always been a little spoofy for me. But like I said before the stream cut out for a moment. Oh, wait. Says we're live. Okay. I can't see anything. I hope we're live. I don't know what happened there. Let's see. We are... Can you guys see me? Buffer. That's so strange. Wait. Can you guys see me? That's so weird. I don't know what happened there. Okay. Buffering. Has Chucky hacked the internet? Feed the internet, squirrels. We're back. Yeah, that's so weird. Yeah, people often say, I saw somebody say, it's the Canadian internet. I got the fastest internet money can buy. I think it's more OBS. Very strange. Don't know what happened. I did accidentally hit the stop button before. I know that because I know where it is. But now I don't know what's going on there. Well, we're going to truck through. You might see some lag. It looks like it's kind of being funky with me. But we're going to work through this. Let me go back to that super chat. All right. I'm going to put this down here so I can actually see the feed. Yeah, I can see the feed there. So anyway, before we were interrupted again, I don't know how this is going to work on the live feed, but before I was and I apologize for this. It shouldn't be doing this. Before I was interrupted, I was talking about crossover films and how I'm not a big fan of the crossover films in terms of the versus films. So it's just not something that I'm a big fan of. They're a little too spoofy for me and a little too chintzy and kind of, yeah, it's just, it's not something I particularly want to see. But I know there are a lot of fans that love them. I know there are a lot of fans that do indeed love them. Cordell, super chat. Thanks, buddy. Says, besides you, who should play Freddy besides me? Oh, there's lots of people who can play him. There's lots of people. There are talented actors out there that can absolutely don the fedora and the glove and do justice to the character. I firmly believe that 100%. 100%. But I don't think it should be somebody known. I know that Robert Englund in the past has mentioned that Kevin Bacon should play Freddy. And, you know, we sometimes forget that Kevin Bacon is into his 60s now, too. And if you're going to reboot A Nightmare on Elm Street, let's not forget that Robert Englund was 37 in the original Elm Street. So it's not that Kevin Bacon couldn't play Freddy. He could play him. But I think it would work better if you hire somebody younger and somebody who maybe isn't as well known. That's what I want to do. Or that's what I think they should do, at the very least. And because there are people out there that can do it. I know people are emotionally attached to Freddy, and they only see him, are emotionally attached to Robert Englund playing Freddy, and they only see him playing Freddy, and I understand that. I do. I mean, listen, Harrison Ford will always be my Han Solo. Harrison Ford will always be my Indiana Jones. But that doesn't mean that there isn't somebody out there that can do justice to the character, because that's what it's about. And I believe that there is somebody out there that can absolutely, unequivocally deliver a Freddy Krueger performance that you and everybody can be proud of. You're not necessarily going to watch it and go, oh my God, that's Robert Englund, because I don't think the key is to do an interpretation of Robert Englund, because anybody can do, it's like voiceover, okay, when it comes to impressions. I'm not an impressionist. Okay. I couldn't do an impression if my life, I can do little one-liners and things like that. But in terms of actually speaking like somebody for 45 minutes and you closing your eyes thinking, oh my God, that really does sound like Al Pacino, or that really does sound like Bill Clinton or Donald Trump or something to that effect, it's not my forte. I leave that for the professional impressionists. When it comes to acting, it's one thing to be able to do a Freddy Krueger, Robert Englund impression by saying one line or by saying, by saying one thing. But can you sound like him and deliver that performance under pressure, in front of cameras consistently for an entire film? That's a different ballgame altogether. And that's why it's always usually in an actor's best interest to not to try and do an impression of that character that they are trying to emulate, but to just bring the essence of the character to the screen so that when you watch the movie, you go, well, it's not Robert Englund, but it's definitely Freddy Krueger. I believe that is Freddy. And that really, at the end of the day, is what needs to be done. And it's how I'm approaching Freddy Krueger when it comes to Dylan's New Nightmare. I'm not going in there. Listen, I'm not going to please everybody. There are people in this chat room that are going to love my performance. And there are people in this chat room that are going to hate my performance. How do I know that? Just it's the odds, right? You're never going to please everybody. But my goal is to work with Miko and Cecil and to find that spot where I have the freedom to be able to make it my own, right? Because I still want to bring what I bring to the table, but bringing the essence of the character to the screen so that when you watch Dylan's New Nightmare, you're like, well, yeah, okay, it's obviously not Robert, but yeah, I totally believe that's Freddy. You know what I mean? That's important. And that's how I think people should approach roles like that. So I absolutely believe there is somebody out there that can do justice to the character 100%. And I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about there are talented actors that can absolutely do it 100%. So yeah, we're back. Again, I apologize for the hiccup there. The first time was definitely me. That was my fault. And then the second time, I don't know what happened. Fucking piece of garbage. But I appreciate your patience while it's only our 4th show, right? We'll get it all worked out. Super chat comes in from Chris Baber. Bill Hader from SNL is capable of pulling off a new Freddy. My stupid opinion. Oh, maybe. Hey, listen, I'm open to seeing anybody. I mean, if I was a casting director, there are definitely people that I would love to see audition for it. And Bill Hader, I wouldn't turn down an audition. From him, sure. Let's see what he can do, right? That's interesting. That's very interesting. Franklin Stein says, I think Freddy should have a reboot prequel. Call it Springwood Slasher. If it's good, you can say prequel to the originals. If it's really good, it can lead into its own series. Thoughts? Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not a bad idea. The obstacles that the studios face and the filmmakers face with this is that they understand it's all about brand identity. And Freddy Krueger is the brand of the franchise, as is Jason I think a Friday the 13th film, I think they should go back to the Pamela Voorhees days and start with the foundation and build it up so we see Jason, drowning and Pamela getting her revenge. And so it's sort of like the beginning of all that leading into kind of like a remake of the first Friday, setting things up for the sequel. Now, there are a lot of Friday fans that might be on board with that. But like, yeah, that's cool. But the problem is that Jason is the look of Jason, the hockey mask. It's so part of the brand. It's so part of the Friday the 13th identity that you run the risk of alienating some fans because they don't really want to see that. And when you ask the vast majority of Friday the 13th fans, what's your favorite Friday film? The original is not usually high on their list. It's not even usually in the top 4. Do you know what I'm saying? So now for me it's my number 1, but it's not usually up there. So there is that issue, but and you run into the same thing with Freddy, right? The look of Freddy is so part of his identity because we were introduced to him already looking like that. Now I know in later sequels, obviously there were, flashbacks with Robert doing his thing. But I still think it's part of, it's still something you have to think about when you're talking about the business side of things and what is going to appeal to a certain demographic and audience. But on paper, I like the idea because anytime you can set a strong foundation, that's really important. And maybe you sort of do what the 2010 remake was attempting to do by you introduce, you see the beginnings of the foundation, but it also leads into maybe the first film. I mean, I don't know what the right way would be, but I do know that it's somewhere in there. It's somewhere in there. And if I was a producer at the studio and I was in the writer's room with these guys, I would say, pitch me these ideas. Let's see if we can figure this out. Because that's what happens, right? I mean, you sit in a writer's room with the writers and sometimes the producer's there, but not all the time. And you hammer out, you have a whiteboard and, you hammer out ideas and different sort of timelines and paths of what feels organic, what feels right, what is going to get the shareholders excited, but what's also going to get the fans excited? What can you deliver, in your area of strengths and things like that? And what feels right in terms of this kind of a story, and how it connects to the others and the larger mythology and all that kind of thing. So, I mean, it's not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea. I don't know if it would make the cut, but it's not a bad idea. Let's see. Just want to make sure I didn't miss any super chats during that massive hiccup there. Fucking Aaron Click says, Striker 80. Oh, he's laughing at somebody. Aaron Keller says, I still say, as a known actor playing Freddy, Zach Ward would be great. Would be a great casting, as he inadvertently plays him in Freddy versus Jason. Right. I know who you're talking about. I know the guy because you've sent me his photo. Bring him in for an audition, right? I mean, sometimes you can look at people and there's moments, but let's bring him in. Let's bring Bill Hader in. Let's bring him in. And let's see the feeling we get, right? Let's see their approach to the character, any ideas that they have. What are they thinking for the character? When the actors read the sides and they go in for the audition, let's ask them, what are you thinking for the character? What's your approach? When you read this, tell me what you think, and let's see what they do. I mean, that's why you audition people, right? I mean, that's what we're going to be doing with It's Me, Billy. We're going to be auditioning people. So, I mean, it's one of those things where it's so important that you pick especially when it comes to Freddy. Jason, not so much, because he's a guy behind a mask. So size matters, movement matters, but there isn't a verbal performance. And even though I think they need to go dark Freddy, that's how it has to be. It can't be whimsical cartoon Freddy. I think Freddy needs to be dark. There is still a dark whimsy about him. So he doesn't become the ridiculous cartoon character or MTV Freddy that he became in Elm Street 4. And we saw the beginnings of in Elm Street 3. And certainly by Elm Street 5, he's like force feeding this fat girl who's having a dream. You know where he became. But even in the first two Elm Streets, which are arguably the darkest portrayal of his character, he had a dark humor about him. So that is something that the actor has to be able to bring. The understanding of that he's enjoying this, but not enjoying it in the same ways he did in Dream Master and Dream Child and Freddy's Dead, but enjoying it from almost a very more of a sadistic kind of uncomfortable enjoyment. And that's something too. There's a lot of things, but it's more important that you get the right Freddy, because it's a speaking role and it's more of an involved, Robert Englund, I believe, had a lot of theater experience as well. So he understands movement and body, and being one with that and understanding what he is and or what the character is and what he can bring to it. He's always thinking on his feet, and that's really important. So dragging somebody from not dragging them, but getting somebody from the theater is not a bad idea either. Lots of interesting things to talk about there. Hey, I noticed we've just jumped up again in our views. So for those of you that are back, I apologize for the hiccup. Crazy hiccup. I don't know what the hell happened. Hey, it's technology. Destination Station. What if Freddy had a long lost son that he can hand over the glove? I get it in principle. I understand it, but I don't think it's going to work. I just think that kind of thing, passing the torch and all that is just not something that I think fans would really want to see. Again, because of the brand identity. So I understand what you're saying. Again, winning solves everything. If you make a movie like that it's really good and it feels really organic and it's really awesome, I don't think anybody's going to care. You know what I mean? But generally speaking, I think if you were to find out that that's what they were doing, I think you're massively behind the eight ball already. But I get what you're trying to say. Dude says, am I alone in thinking that David Gordon Green's looks a lot like the Myers mask from Part 5? So David Gordon Green, his look, the way he looks naturally, looks like the mask from Halloween 5. I guess I can kind of see it. I see a little bit of what you're talking about. That's interesting. I've never really thought that myself, but certainly I can see what you're talking about. That's kind of funny. Let's see here. Aaron White says, as a method actor, Christian Bale could really get into character. American Psycho, Invading Dreams. Okay. I see what you're saying. I think you'd have a hard time selling Bale as Freddy, not because he couldn't do it and surprise the fuck out of people, because I think he could, but initially because of how identified he is with other properties. But you're on the right track with your way of thinking. Christian Bale is a really, like, you're on the right track. I don't know if he would be right for Freddy, but definitely you're on the right track. And again, it doesn't have to be somebody method like that. But I would prefer somebody that maybe, like, Robert Englund you knew as the character actor from V. You know what I mean? Like, oh, him, and if you watched V and you found out it was him, you'd be like, oh, okay. But he wasn't a household name. Now, even Robert Englund today is not a household name. He's a household name in the world of horror, 100%. But if I went and asked just some Joe Schmo on the street, do you know who Robert Englund is? There's a good probability that a large majority of the people I ask, random people, would be like, Robert Englund, no. If I say Tom Hanks, everybody knows who Tom Hanks is, right? That's a different level altogether. So it doesn't have to be a completely unknown person like how Daisy Ridley was to, The Force Awakens. But I think it definitely should be somebody that is not an A-list actor and isn't somebody that is immediately recognizable, because I want that person to really seep into the character of Freddy. And with somebody like Kevin Bacon, I can't help but think that I would just be looking at Kevin Bacon as Freddy. And he's too old now. He's too old to be Freddy. Listen, if you're going to cast Kevin Bacon as Freddy, why don't you just cast Robert as Freddy again? You know what I mean? Granted, Kevin Bacon's about 10 years younger, if not 12 years younger, but still, I don't think he's young enough. Wayne Downey says, on my lunch break, just checking in to say hi. Hey, Wayne, how you doing, buddy? Great to see you. Super chat comes in from Big G. Should the next Freddy film have comedy or not? No, but it depends on what you mean by comedy. I think the next, you can't completely neuter the character. And the character of Freddy, even in parts 1 and 2, which are arguably the darkest of the franchise, and I don't even think there's much of an argument there. I think they are. There is that dark humor that I talk about, but it's not the whimsy carnival barker humor that you get in 3, 4, 5, and 6, right? And not really in 3. You get the beginnings of it in 3, but you certainly get it 4, 5, and 6. It's more of that dark, playful, creepy, like he's really enjoying this kind of humor. So like, when he comes out from the tree, right? He's like, Tina, watch this, that's kind of like, it's that kind of, it's like, oh, that's kind of creepy, right? Or when he's, when he walks into the cell, right? And he's about to kill Rod. And, and Nancy is, looking down at him from the cell, and Freddy just kind of, looks up like this, with a little bit of a smirk, like, yeah, that's right. I'm going to fucking kill him and there ain't nothing you can do about it. Just that little kind of smirk. You know what I mean? Just things like that. Like Freddy always had that, but when it's presented against the backdrop of the kind of character that Freddy is, or the kind of movie this is, and how it takes itself relatively seriously, it's very creepy. So darkish humor like that is okay. Or like in Elm Street 2, when Jesse just finishes killing Grady, and you see Freddy in the mirror, right? And he's going, and it's just kind of like, that's dark. Like he's laughing at him, but there's nothing, like, you're not laughing at Freddy. That's basically what I'm saying. Like, you're not going, that was really funny. You know what I mean? No, you're just understanding the character is finding this amusing. But you yourself are like, fuck, that's sick. Do you know what I mean? Whereas when you get to the later sequels, you yourself as an audience member are actually laughing at this. And that I don't think they should do. So you don't neuter the character completely. You just reel him back to what makes Freddy, what makes him so scary, in my opinion. Let's see here. So make sure I didn't miss any super chats. Okay, we're going to wind up here. We're going to wind down here in a few seconds. Lennox Mate says, H2O should have been a sequel to 6, in my opinion. Imagine the emotional turmoil that Laurie would have been feeling, having given up Jamie and faked her death. And yes, but from a business perspective, it would have been a mistake because Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers did not perform very well. And I agree with what you were saying, but unfortunately, that probably would have been a mistake. So much so that they didn't want to lose any more money, that they were thinking about making the next installment just straight to video. But then, of course, this idea came along, hey, why don't we do this? And because of Scream, now you could say, well, maybe the Halloween 6 you're talking about, or the Halloween 7 that you're talking about would have done better because of Scream. Maybe it would have. It may have. You never know. But I do understand why they didn't do it. Chris Baber Super Chat says, Pedro Pascal would also be an interesting option. Yes, he's playing the Mandalorian right now, is he not? Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, interesting. I think Carrot Top would be an interesting choice. Can you imagine Carrot Top? I think Kevin James, a little bit of a heftier Freddy. I think that would be okay. I'm being facetious, by the way, guys. I'm not being serious. Let me see here. Jason Meyer says, yep, Robert is 75. Too old to do the stuff he did in the 80s. His knees would give out. Well, he said that, right? He says, he can play. He says that maybe he had, like the quote he has is that maybe there's one more left in me. But they don't make these movies to make one movie. They make these movies for the potential of there being a sequel. And I don't think Robert, he's 75, and when you're, to sit in that chair for hours on end every day and put on makeup and then perform is a tough thing to do. And I'm going to be doing it in a little micro, example with Dylan's new Nightmare. I'm going to be in the makeup chair for about 4 hours every day that I'm there, getting my makeup on and then going to set and working. And I'm going to have a blast. It's going to be a lot of fun. But I can imagine being older, 35 years older than me, and having to go through that. It just feels like, I don't know, It's one of the reasons why Nick Castle, I mean, look, they probably didn't want him anyway. But even if they did, I think Nick would have said the same thing. He says, no, I can't do, I'm 70 something years old now, and it's, I'll give it to James. I don't want to be up till 4 and 5 in the morning every night with a mask in the cold. I've been there, done that. I just, I'm retired now. I'll just do a little cameo. I get it. I understand it. So I don't think that, I just don't think Robert wants to do it. Look, he can do it for the Goldbergs because it probably took a day to shoot. It maybe two. But it's a one-off thing. It's a controlled environment. You're in a studio, you're on set. It's something, it's good nostalgia for him, but being in a film full on, with a big crew and real pressure and I don't know. I mean, maybe he would, but then like I said earlier in the show, you have to ask yourself, well, what if he doesn't want to do another one? Then what? He's like, no, I'm done. I think it's best to just recast, really, at the end of the day. Pass the torch that way. Holly Klein says, stopping by to say hi. Looking forward to your rendition of Freddy. Thank you, Holly. Much appreciated. Frank Riker, Super Chat, says, Dave, wouldn't an A-lister kill a horror budget? Not necessarily. But I don't think it's needed. I understand what you're saying. Like, I just think it's important that with the character of Freddy, we can get, especially, you want the performance to stand on its own. And you don't want to be able to see things that aren't there. So because you're a huge Kevin Bacon fan, you think it's better than it actually is. Or because you're a huge, Pedro Pascal fan, you think it's better than it really is. It's so important that the character of Freddy be able to stand on its own, especially because of the expectations that they're up against. And you want it to really be able to deliver, but that doesn't mean an A-lister couldn't do it. Doesn't mean that at all, and deliver something that is amazing. But I don't know. For me, I'm leaning towards somebody that is just a really good character actor that understands the nuances of what made Freddy Freddy and can deliver and if that's an A-list actor, well, then it's an A-list actor. But I lean towards somebody that is not known per se. All right, guys, that is going to do it for me here on episode 4 of McRae Live. I have to skedaddle. I got some things I got to do here, but I really appreciate you tuning in, and sorry for that hiccup that happened about 3/4 of the way through the show. Seems like it worked itself out, whatever the hell it was. The first time was me. I accidentally had stopped, and then the second time was not me. So, yeah, my apologies. But nonetheless, we're working out the kinks. We're getting things done here with McRae Live. I will be back again on Thursday morning at 11 o'clock a.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's always 11 o'clock a.m. Make sure you tune in for that. I will let you know what the topic will be in the next day or two. And, yeah, and make sure that you... tune in, and let me just see here. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. I did not miss any super chats. No, and no chats at all. Okay, good. Yeah, and also, keep in mind, folks, if I did not answer your question, it's nothing personal. I try to get to as many as I can. Always remember that. I have to answer the super chats, of course, for obvious reasons, but always know that it's never personal if I don't get to your questions. It is just there's a lot of people that are watching, and I try to get to as many as I can, and I also try to be as thorough as I can because I think you guys deserve that. But I appreciate your questions nonetheless, and you always have another opportunity to pique my interest and pique my eyes in the next show that happens. So I appreciate you tuning in and the questions and the support. Nonetheless, I think you guys are awesome. You guys rock. So until Thursday morning at 11 o'clock a.m. In the meantime and in between time, I will talk to you guys soon. Alrighty. Cheers.